Hey, everybody. I just wanted to do a quick follow-up after our conversation on last night's meeting about pharmaceutical drugs. Um, it is such a complicated, individual, personal, controversial topic. And I just wanted to kind of come full circle because I'm working with many of you who are facing or dealing with this issue in some capacity. Whether you're trying to get off drugs, and by drugs I mean, SSRIs or some sort of benzodiazepine or something like that. Whether you're trying to get off pharmaceuticals, or whether you're wondering if you might use them as a tool to benefit you because pause and depression are just so deep, and you just need an oxygen mask. And I wanted to invite all of you to join me in my kind of opinion. And again, it's an invitation. The older I get, the more I realize I don't know anything. I when I think about the wisdom of our forefathers, and we're supposed to ask, adults who have lived through things, and sometimes we do get a lot of wisdom, but personally, I feel that any wisdom I have is really tied to the concept that there's not one right answer, and that there's not one set of beliefs that work for everybody. And the older I get, the more I realize that all the science and all the psychology and all of the information that we have access to, there's so much that our brains are overloaded with constantly. And we're vulnerable to different tides. You think we're not even aware of the place we are in history, and what we new ideas that come up in the 60s and 70s. Pharmaceutical mental health drugs became lifesavers, and truly did a lot of good things. And then there's also stories, prior to the introduction of drugs, they were doing lobotomies and shock treatments on people. And so much of this, if we give it 100 years, which we don't have, I get that, but if we would give it 100 years or 1,000 years, the thoughts that we're concerning ourselves with and the information that we think we know versus the information we think we should know, when in fact we're not even asking the right question, we're looking at the wrong data to draw conclusions, is just part of the human experience. And so after our conversation last night, where one of you shared that you have been reflecting on the use of an SSRI and how that may have contributed to cravings and potentially increased your rate of addiction, if you will. Of course, it probably didn't cause it, but did it play a role? Maybe. And how there's so much information out there in forums. If you Google it, you're going to find communities of people where they believe that, the pharmaceutical drugs that they've been put on has created the hell of their current lives. And that's the experience that they're living. And my point in pointing out those communities is there are also communities of people who are saying, this drug saved my life. I was suicidal or I was non functional, and going on this medication changed everything. And so it appears that people have different experiences, and it appears that people are disagreeing. And I want to give you maybe a little bit of a higher up view or way to think about it. And that is, at least for us right now in this moment in sobriety, and especially early sobriety, we're all going up the same mountain. We're leaving addiction behind, and we're moving towards our mental health. And our questions of the role that drugs play in our mental health, whether it be the enhancement or the deterioration, those are all just questions that we all have to deal with. And what if ultimately it doesn't matter the decision that you make towards your mental health. What if going on or going off a drug ultimately doesn't change the fact that you're on the path to recovery? You know, when you think of this as a mountain as opposed to a flat path, the journey of recovery, there are multiple roads up the mountain. You know, you could be in AA. You could be in the sober curious community where they explore and work with moderation. In my community, I try to make a patchwork of recovery, you know, beliefs that work for you and self care practices that work for you. But if we, instead of looking at this as a flat process from point A to point B, we looked at it as an upward process and gave honor to the fact that there's multiple paths. Some of those paths may be shorter, some of those paths may be windy and scenic, but they're all going up if the intention is to move up, if the intention is to reclaim your mental health. What if you can't make a mistake? What if having a relapse with alcohol isn't a mistake? It's part of the journey. You're learning, you're growing, you're collecting data, you're testing the system, you're testing your new beliefs. What if taking a drink isn't a mistake? What if taking a drug isn't a mistake? What if going off the drug isn't a mistake? If this is an ongoing experiment, you'll just experience whatever the consequences of going on, going off, increasing, decreasing, tapering, whatever, and then you'll self correct. You know, in my words that I use to describe um, recovery, sobriety is the vehicle, not the destination. And I kind of perceive, granted, it's a superficial perception, but I kind of perceive like AA, where sobriety is the end goal. You know, they encourage people to get off of their drugs. They don't think that you should take any medication. And so you can be miserable and sober and get the prize for being the most sober. And, you know, the people who are kind of experimenting and exploring other options, their sobriety doesn't count. And if you have one drink after a year of sobriety, you go back to zero. Well, I don't agree with that. And yet I recognize it's a path on the mountain that leads up to mental health, you know, whatever works for you. So I wanted to open the fact and acknowledge the fact that that conversation last night was hard. There is no right answer. And our job, my goal, and I think your goal too, is not to have a censored conversation where everybody can only say things that makes the other 12 people on the call comfortable. That is not what I want. That is not why we are here. Um, and I think most of you would agree with me. And if you're finding that you disagree with that, then I can respect that. And maybe, you know, we look at another option. But I know each and every one of you on some level agrees that we want to be able to speak our minds and share our experiences and exchange data, in that maybe you know something I don't, or maybe my experience can help you. That's why we're all here. So in terms of pharmaceuticals, all I want to say is that I admitted last night on the call that after 9 months of slopping through the schlep, I had compassion on myself. I didn't want to be on pharmaceuticals, but I wasn't thriving, and I gave it 9 months. I mean, how long have some of you been, you know, in here? 2 months, 3 months. I went 9 months thinking, okay, next week I'm going to feel better. Okay, next month. Okay, I can do this. It's the quarantine. I don't have to work full time. Like this, I can do this. And I finally just said, Uncle, I can't. And even though I don't believe in pharmaceutical drugs, because I do believe that, and this is my belief, and if it offends you, then I apologize for offending you. It's just my truth. And we have to make space for that. I believe that many pharmaceutical drugs, as they are prescribed to the masses, you know, 4 out of 5 Americans take one prescription drug. 1 out of 5 of us takes more than 5 a day. I definitely think that's not okay. But just like alcohol use disorder, you know, there's 50 shades of gray in there. And so I know in my own life, there have been times when these medications have been I know I'm supposed to go to the gym and work out, but I can't put my shoes on. Sometimes the medications have helped me put on my shoes. And I can't say that I regret medications that I've taken. Well, I can say that I do, but I have to give myself love and compassion. I've been doing the best I can every single day for a lot of my life. And when I went on drugs, I feel like I maybe had some beliefs that I was using the drugs to enhance my life or cheat. I guess I always kind of felt, at least with the drug I'm on now, that it was more of a cheat than a necessity. And so that belief is my problem, not the drug itself. You know what I'm saying? It's my thoughts about why I took the drugs that create the negative feeling about the drugs, because the drugs are just neutral. Drugs can be a tool. And sometimes there's a hammer and there's a nail and that works out. And sometimes you need a different tool. So drugs are neutral. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. In the circumstance line of our thought models, drugs are just neutral. We can take drugs. How we feel about them has so much more to do about our own personal thought process and our body chemistry and our brain chemistry. And so I just encourage you to take responsibility for the way you feel about the use of pharmaceuticals, pro or con, and then be compassionate for yourself. That, being attached to an idea, like I've been attached to a lot of ideas. I believed that I shouldn't eat meat for 12 years. And now I'm like, okay, I'm done exploring every single supplement on the planet and swallowing 25 pills a day. I'm going to try eating some meat, and food is medicine. So I deprived myself of meat and I'm going to do it for a few months. And then we'll see by Christmas if I end up deciding that ultimately I don't, meat isn't helping me. But ultimately, we have to challenge our own ideas and we have to do our own experiments and we have to give ourselves compassion that we do or do not want to try certain things. And I just encourage all of you to be kind to yourself and with others. And be kind to yourself when you judge other people in your mind. So I want to share just a quick story about some of you were with me when I went through COVID this summer, and prior to going and getting Delta COVID and literally almost dying, I was not for the vaccine. For me personally, I wasn't anti-vaccine. You should get it if you want it. I just didn't think I needed it. And I had beliefs that ultimately it might do my immune system more harm, and that I actually probably would welcome COVID if it came to me because it would give my body a chance to fight it off naturally, whatever that means. And well, we know what that means. I don't mean to belittle that. But I wasn't scared of COVID. I figured I was healthy. Turns out I got COVID and I literally almost died. And so because of that, I reconsidered my position on the vaccine. I asked my kids to get it. I told them I wanted them to get it. I asked my parents to get it because I didn't want anybody to go through what I did. Okay, so some of you know that. Well, the friends and the people that I had aligned with prior who were not pro-vaccine, some of them would actually be called anti-vaxxers, but some of them are just, you do you, I'll do me. When I had a conversation with one of those friends, I got super triggered because I had decided to get the vaccine. And this friend of mine does a podcast. I've actually been featured on it. And she had interviewed a naturopathic doctor, and that they were talking about the protein spikes causing a hormone disruption like estrogen. And I got fucking pissed. They are spreading misinformation. They're not using real data. And I reached out to her and I didn't rip her head off, but I let her know that I disagreed with her opinion and felt it was very irresponsible for her to be putting something like that on her podcast, because right now is not a time to tell people to not get vaccines. Okay. And she responded super kind. The other thing about the podcast is the doctor she interviewed, there was 2 episodes and I was like, oh my God, I found my doctor. I can go to a doctor. And I was so excited until the end of the second hour, where suddenly they're talking about wacky bullshit with the vaccine causing these estrogen spikes. So anyway, I was triggered, but in the end, whenever for something to trigger your emotions, and listen carefully to this, if you're feeling a reaction to something, it's because on some level you believe there is some truth to it. And what we don't allow for ourselves, or we get uncomfortable, is that we can believe multiple things at once. I currently believe that vaccines save lives. And I believe that vaccines cause problems. And I believe that some people are fine without it and some people not. I mean, I could go down my list of conflicting beliefs, but I think you get my point. But at the moment, I had just recovered from COVID. I had decided to get the vaccine and I was getting my first vaccine. I could not make room for two different opinions. I had flipped so that I was listening to kind of the mainstream narrative and I was team vaccine and I was identifying with that. And I could not tolerate the fact that she was not agreeing with that. Ultimately, I was uncomfortable with my own decision, not her opinion. You know, if I had no emotional attachment to that, it'd be the same thing I think about people who think that we're getting magnetized with the vaccine. I mean, those people, I apologize if you're one of them, but there's always extremists. The more extreme it is in that particular case where the vaccines are making us magnetized, I don't even have an emotional reaction. I'm like, okay. But because her opinion was closer to maybe where I had been, I couldn't tolerate it because I had to, I guess, in my mind, make a decision one way or the other. And in the end, I made the decision the best I could at the time. I got the vaccine so that I could go on that retreat because I couldn't have gone. And I got sick with both vaccines. I lived through it and I did the best I could. Like there's no right or wrong here, you know? Um, and that's the thing. I think we're constantly looking for the right answer and the wrong answer. And if we did something we later think didn't work, then we have to label that as wrong and we have to judge ourselves or we have to judge other people. And ultimately, we're all here doing the human thing. If you think of sobriety as or recovery as you're climbing up a mountain instead of that linear point A to point B, then you'll recognize that there are many paths that lead up the mountain. The problem with the point A to point B image is that you can go in the wrong direction. And that if you take a drug, you can end up moving back towards addiction. And if you get off a drug, you could end up going back towards addiction. Whereas if you reframe that and understand that, you've asked for help and you're in a community of people that can help you, that ultimately, if you take a drug and it ends up leading to cravings and maybe a relapse, that you can reroute. And if you get off the drug and you end up crying in your soup and you can't get out of bed, then you can reroute and go back on the drugs. There is no right or wrong answer. And here's the interesting thing, full circle about the podcast and the comment with the naturopathic doctor. Post-vaccine, my hormones did exactly what that doctor was saying. My estrogen levels are at like 1200. When they saw my blood work, they almost didn't let me leave the office. Like, I don't know what they're going to do. But we've adjusted. I've now gone back off the bioidentical hormones and now I'm taking supplements. I'm letting my naturopath guide me at this point. But isn't that interesting that come full circle? I ended up the very thing that triggered me and made me so mad that this doctor was saying that post-COVID vaccine people get a spike in their hormones and they get all out of whack, that then it happened to me. Well played, universe. Great sense of humor. So finally, I just wanted to talk about the group meetings some. And I'm noticing, and some of you are noticing, and we're talking about it in our private conversations, that sometimes our group meetings, if people are sharing what's going on for them that's going well. Last night Beth gave a share about figuring out that her subconscious has been rewired, and that is such an important share. And it's hard when the conversation starts positive and trends positive for the person who showed up who can barely turn on their camera, or the person who didn't show up and is maybe listening later, or the person who showed up but really has a problem and now doesn't want to burst the fucking balloon bubble that somebody else just started. Somebody on the pink rainbow and butterfly parade is in town, and you don't want to bring up the fact that you're not sure how to go to work tomorrow. And there is no right answer to that. I just want to acknowledge that those of you who are struggling and it's all you can do to get to the call, thank you for coming. And those of you that are struggling who have the courage to share a little bit about that struggle, oh my God, you guys win for most valuable, because we learn from each other's stories. And when you are vulnerable with what you're going through, when you're ready, like you may not be ready, but when you're ready, when you can share the difficult time that you've gone through, that is so powerful, because you're giving your group, your tribe, other members the permission to not be okay, and to acknowledge that things aren't going well. And not only that, but to ask for help, whether it be from the group or whether it be for me one-on-one. That is why we are all here. We are not here to have censored conversations, and we are not here to talk about the superpowers of sobriety 24/7. This is a non-bullshit channel. And every meeting is just, I can't control it. And neither can you. Who shares first and where that goes and what that brings up, it's just part of it. And so if you're not getting what you need from a group call, you have me. Please reach out and utilize that. And I also know that when you're in a negative place and the call trends positive with stories of rewired subconsciouses, that you also can have hope. And so it's very important for those stories to be shared as well. So I just want to honor each of you, whether you show up, whether you can't show up and you listen to the recording, whether you do show up and you can't participate, whether you show up and share your shitty story, or whether you show up and share your motherfucking win. That's just what we're here for. So I love each and every one of you. And I just realized last night when I started the call and talked for 15 minutes with housekeeping shit, I don't ever need to do that again. I'll just make a video with the stuff I want to say. And then when I show up, there's more time for me to hold space for all of you. So we're all learning in this process. We're all adjusting to the changing dynamics as people come and go. And I just treasure each and every one of you. Thank you for being my tribe and for being there for each other. Get on the timeline and share what you're going through. On the website, I did click it through my phone, and if you click the link, it takes you to a page that says my profile, my notifications, all of that. Where's the timeline? It's in the menu bar. So if you click the hamburger, and then it'll open up and you'll have timeline, my profile, whatever else, course, all that sort of thing. So make sure that this behavior change, moving off the private Facebook page, it requires a couple extra different steps. Please take the time to see if you can create a new habit of showing up in the timeline. And we begin to use that as a community to exchange conversations, and I don't have to lead them all. You guys can do some of that. And learn from each other. Anyway, where was I saying? I was saying I'm going to do videos like this instead of taking up time on the call. That was my big aha moment, among others, last night. So I'm open this weekend if you need one-on-one. Happy Friday.